All right, today is July 27, 2018. This is the meeting of the Kubernetes CSI implementation group. And first up on the agenda is something from Cheng. Cheng, are you on the call? Okay. We'll come back to that then. Let me populate the rest of this. Okay. All right, so PRs that need attention. So these are the two big designs that are currently pending, inline CSI volumes and CSI driver registry. For CSI, inline CSI volumes, Jan, do you want to talk about this and see what the current status is?
Oh, well, the status is the same like always. The major blocking issue is here the way how to skip attach for non-attachable volumes. If I can solve that, then I think I can finish the proposal and at least have it approved, and maybe implement also the part for non-attachable CSI volumes.
For the inline CSI volumes, ideally we only want to allow inline CSI volumes for for non-attachable volumes. And is the pushback that we don't? What is the pushback?
If we want to move to CSI, the entry volume plugins, then we need also entry attachable volumes in CSI somehow.
Okay.
The initial implementation can start with non-attachable, of course, but in the end, I think we will need also the attachable ones.
I see.
To move from the entry volume plugins to CSI.
So I think there was a plan that you guys had for the entry volume plugins.
For the migration?
For the migration.
Yeah, they need to be attachable.
So I want to make sure I understand the proposal here. So the proposal for inline CSI volumes was saying that we're going to have inline CSI volumes, but only for some subset of drivers, not all drivers. So most drivers that are attachable, we're not going to allow inline CSI. The pushback, it sounds like, that you got on this PR was that, oh, what about entry attachable volumes that today can already be referenced as inline? How do we support them? And it sounded like with the migration plan that you guys had, that was already solved, wasn't it?
Not really.
Probably with a similar mechanism. Like we would want to reuse this mechanism, right? That Jan is proposing here to migrate the entry attachable volumes.
So before we had even an inline CSI volume, you guys had a plan, right?
Yeah, it was basic. It was very similar, I think, to like some of the mechanisms that are being used in this plan.
Okay.
But if this plan forces all inline volumes for CSI to be non-attachable, then we would have to probably do something on top of it or different.
Okay. I mean, you could always have like a one-off, like we will allow it for these whitelisted set of drivers, and the entry ones you can whitelist to allow it, and then there was that policy thing that you were talking about. Remember, Jan?
Yeah, but it's sort of ugly, I think.
Yeah, or what we could do is hard code the entry ones to allow it, and then for the CSI ones, we could have logic that detects if it's attachable or not, and then if we have the CSI registry, that should be pretty easy. If we're unable to determine one way or another, the default should be we're not allowing inline. If you want inline, then you need to make sure you register with the CSI driver registry and tell us that you are not attachable.
Yeah, that depends on the registry.
So moving on to that.
We had a couple of meetings, and I'm not convinced we need the registry. We have very limited use cases. I think the attachability was the only one that remained.
And driver discoverability, right? What was that change?
Oh yeah, but you can have this in CRD out of 3.
So you're okay with the CRD, Jan?
I am fine in the CRD if the attachability is somewhere else.
Why do you want attachability? I mean, if we have a CRD, why would you want attachability somewhere else?
I don't want the attach controller to depend on CRD because it has the same stability as Intri API. So why don't we have?
Yeah. So actually, our SIG architecture keeps telling us that Intri components can now depend on CRDs. That was a surprise to me.
That's right, but they insist that the support level is the same for Intri API.
Yeah. Okay. So how about for the Thursday SIG architecture meeting? We go there and see if I can convince them to let us create an Intri object for CSI. If they let us do that, then we do the Intri and we can put attachability there. And if we have attachability there, then inline CSI volumes should be unblocked as well.
Yeah.
If they don't, then we can talk about CRD and other options.
Well, I have other idea. We already put it into node annotation. We already put the mapping from the host name in annotations on the node, so we can put also attachability there. But since SIG architecture requires annotations as stable, we cannot modify the annotation or move it to node status or do anything with that. I have an issue for that. I think I have it also on the agenda somewhere.
Yeah, it just seems weird to me when you have a property that applies to a driver, but it is represented in multiple places and can potentially skew. That just seems like, and what we're doing is taking the existing objects that we have and forcing like a different use case on top of it. To me, it just seems like we're missing a object that we should have. We don't have it, so we're trying to find a home for it. So why not just introduce that object? Why the big pushback? Like it seems like CSI is going to be an important component of how you extend Kubernetes. If you have a first-class way to be able to represent it in the API, it makes discoverability easy, and it allows the internal Kubernetes components to then change their behavior. It allows customizing the Kubernetes behavior when interacting with that driver. And both of those are solid use cases.
I understand this. There is one glitch that the node, the flag in node makes sense, and it's upgrade from non-attachable to attachable. If I have a driver, it's non-attachable, and I issue update to attachable, then half of the nodes has the old driver that's not attachable, the second half has attachable, and if I have it in the node status or in the node annotation, the attach controller can do the right decision for the node.
Oh, that's an interesting idea.
And in the same way, I would also extend the scheduler to schedule pods that needs volumes for some driver, to the nodes that have the driver. But that's completely separate discussion.
Yeah.
So the node status is quite useful actually for annotation.
But I thought, don't we have code right now that makes scheduling decision based on non-node information like topology?
It does. But I think what Jan is arguing is a driver itself, like a volume could be accessible, let's say, on all the nodes in a given zone, but the driver may only be available on some subset of those nodes. And today, the scheduler has no way of knowing what actually has the driver installed and what does not. So having a node level registration does make sense as well. So maybe the answer is both. And the more critical component is the node level one because it'll unblock our immediate use cases. And then the less critical one is the cluster level registration, which will, but then I guess your counter argument is what are the use cases that are left for a cluster level registration? So if we put attachability into the node, and what are the other use cases that we have left?
I thought we wanted to be able to discover drivers that are installed in the cluster.
Discoverability, yeah. Discoverability is a good one, but I think, Jan, your counter argument is that you could do that with the node level.
Yeah, you could, but it's kind of ugly.
It's ugly.
That's where the cluster level object makes sense. But by the way, my use case, like updating non-attachable to attachable, I don't know, it's a real use case. Like,
yeah,
the driver is dead.
It would be pretty rare. And arguably, if you're doing that, you should just uninstall the previous driver and install a new one and then flip the switch to say, okay, now I support attachable. But the other use case that I like is having node be aware of where the driver is available.
We already have that mapping for host names. So scheduler could use that. Unfortunately, it is annotation instead of proper status.
Right.
But it's a completely separate discussion from attachability.
Yeah.
For the second one, the finding out which nodes have the driver on it, doesn't topology cover that? Because each driver has to like kind of register their topology with node get info, so they have to register what topology that driver is on. So you wouldn't, like from that you could already get
the node wouldn't have the correct labels on it.
I think that topology is optional. So if I have an FS driver that runs everywhere.
Right. Topology is optional, so you could have a driver that doesn't support topology but is not equally available. Yeah, okay. So here's what I'm thinking. So I still think that there's a use case for having an object. I'm going to go to SIG architecture this Thursday. Let me take a look at. I think attachability actually can go either place, but I want a use case for having it at the cluster level. So let me see, SIG architecture. Okay. So let's go to SIG architecture, propose a new object. If they allow the new object, we could put attachability in there. If they don't allow it, then we can consider the alternatives. The alternatives are we do a CRD with attachability at the cluster level, or we do it at the node level. But I really, really want to solve this, let's say by end of week, next week, by Friday, so that we can unblock all these other issues that we have.
Yeah. I want it solved too.
Okay.
And when you go to SIG architecture, I have other topic. I need to find it. Right now we have the mapping for host names, in node annotations. And it would be nice if you could move it to node status. But SIG architecture declared the annotation as API and we can't move it. So if there is a way how to move it somehow, it would be nice. I have issue upstream.
I remember seeing this issue. I think it was this one. Let's see, where did it go? This one?
Yeah, that's it.
So currently, you're saying that the information about mapping the Kubernetes name to the CSI node name is currently in an annotation. You want to move this to a structured field in the node status.
Yeah, so we can add new information there in the future.
Mm-hmm. And the challenge you're saying is backward compatibility?
Yeah.
So why don't we keep both for some time and then phase out the...
Because annotations are now part of the API. We can't remove annotations.
But it doesn't need to change, right? If we use this new CSI driver status thing, we can keep adding more fields to that, and we don't have to upgrade the annotations. We can just leave it as it.
Yeah,
for sure. But the node object is quite big already, and this will double the information we have.
So right now, who is using this information? The only consumer of this is the external attacher.
Yes.
The external attacher.
I can fix the attacher, that's simple.
Yeah.
But since it is a public annotation, there may be other people who use that.
So technically the reason for this rule of annotations are part of the API is because there was breaking changes where an annotation was deprecated and it caused cascading failures that resulted in downtime when people upgraded to the new version. If we can prevent that. Right now, I don't know if any CSI production drivers like that are being used in production because the feature itself is beta. I think since it's beta, the annotation is also beta. And we can say that for GA, we are migrating from the annotation to the field.
And the rule applies also to beta annotation.
What's that?
And the rule applies also to beta annotations. I need to find the message.
But here's what I'm thinking. So if you have a CSI driver today and you publish it, you also publish it with an external provisioner. So your driver is going to have a driver registrar that puts the annotation, and it has an external provisioner that reads that annotation. All those components are shipped with your driver. So if you upgrade to a new version of Kubernetes, nothing changes for you. If you upgrade to a new version of the driver registrar, the new version of the driver registrar will write to this field, and a new version of the external provisioner reads from this field instead of the annotation. So you explicitly have to opt into this behavior by upgrading your driver with new version of driver registrar and new version of the external provisioner.
Yeah, I understand all this, but still, if we're removing annotation, we are breaking the rules.
Yeah, I think we can get an exception here.
I hope so.
Let me. Yeah, I'm okay approving it from SIG storage level. I don't know what other approvals we need, but I think we're okay here. Like, we're not breaking backwards compatibility.
No.
We're just kind of moving this over, and all the components that we ship are bundled, so it should be pretty painless.
And these are existing annotations that we use today we're talking about, right? Not the new stuff.
Right. So today, when the driver registrar comes up, it applies a annotation, updates the node annotation on the node object to say, hey, the name for this node, according to this CSI driver, is such and such.
Right.
And so then the external attacher uses that information when it needs to do an attach to figure out what the mapping is. And so the proposal here is, instead of an annotation, have a first class field, which I totally agree with. It's a great idea. But I think what Jan is raising is that, hey, an annotation is basically like a field in terms of deprecation policy. We can't just remove it. And so
when you say first class field, you're talking about inside an object, or?
Yeah. So in fact, like, just because it's an annotation doesn't mean we can like willy-nilly just decide to drop support for it in a new release. The reason for that is that we got bit multiple times where annotation was removed, and when Kubernetes was upgraded, things started breaking. So I think we're going to be okay, because in this case, we've thought through the forward-backward compatibility scenarios, and they aren't going to actually break anything. But he's right. Like, by the letter of the law, we're not supposed to do that.
And this is true even if we're still in beta.
Yes.
Okay.
Why won't this break anything? So like, if we remove it in, say, like 113, and you're running a CSI driver with 0.3 version of the attacher, wouldn't that just not work anymore?
The attacher and provisioner and driver registrar are all bundled with your driver. So you explicitly choose, and currently this annotation is set by the driver registrar. So if you're depending on it, as long as your driver registrar is running and your external provisioner or attacher are running, and they're bundled together, it'll all just work.
Okay.
If we move forward into the future and we introduce the ability for this to be a field, then we updated the driver registrar and we updated the external attacher, but you'd have to opt into pulling both into your driver. And then when you pull them both in, it should just work.
Makes sense.
One caveat to this is that last quarter there was work done at the alpha level to pull the logic in the driver registrar into the kubelet. So if you opt into that alpha behavior, the kubelet actually does registration, and part of the registration is calling out or updating the node annotation instead of the driver registrar doing the node annotation. That behavior is currently alpha, so there should be nobody depending on that behavior. So I think we should be okay there.
We should do this quickly.
Yeah, we should do this quickly this quarter. To be clear, removing this annotation and replacing with a new field will not break anything. Existing drivers will ship with a driver registrar with an old driver registrar that will continue to apply this annotation, and an old external attacher that will continue to read this annotation. New drivers will opt into new versions of these components that will read and write the field instead of the annotation. From the SIG storage perspective, I approve this change. All right, sorry about doing my homework in front of you. Okay, so action items are going forward. Let's go to SIG architecture on Thursday, and then we'll go from there. All right, next up, miscellaneous updates. We already talked about the node annotation issue. I'm okay with this change. So Jan, do you want to also, I guess if we could get a thumbs up or thumbs down from Jordan, we would be okay.
Yeah, I'll try.
So if you could just poke him, I think that should be sufficient. Any updates on the entry migration plan? That was a question last time that came up, David.
So I've updated it to use the new Jordan's suggested method of instead of translating all the objects and putting them in an annotation to create a external, like a third-party library that does the translation that we import everywhere and kind of translate on the fly. I thought through the scenarios and I think it will work. I wrote it down in the design. I just need someone to review it now.
Okay, I will do.
Okay,
I will
great.
do.
Thank you.
That looks good. Thanks. And then Chang has a proposal on topology keys, but it looks like he's not on the meeting. We'll see next time. Patrick, you have a switching to unified repo. Are you on the call?
I'm here, yes. Well, we decided to do that eventually at some point, and I just wanted to ask whether now would be a good time to pursue that more earnestly. What I did last week is I updated the existing repo that I prepared so that it's up to date with the current code in the individual repos. I then noticed that we also have some more repositories that I just hadn't noticed before or that popped up since then.
Yeah.
The external snapshotter and the liveness probe.
So what I'm noticing is that we're having more and more functionality that's being added. So for example, today we had a discussion about cloning, and there was an idea of an external populator. And I think based on that, I would prefer not to have this functionality all in a single repo. I think there's a lot of benefit to having these components be independent in separate repos, independently versioned and managed and reviewed, because otherwise what we end up with is something like we had with the existing external storage repo. So today we have an external storage repo that we have the external provisioner in, we have a snapshot controller in there, and it's a huge mess. It's has no CI/CD running on it. There's no releases or anything like that, and it's very difficult to manage because there's no clear ownership of it. If we have separate repositories where there's very clear ownership, it becomes much easier to manage. And so far, I think with the external attacher, external provisioner, I agree that there has been some repeated code, but overall it's been relatively easy to manage because more or less they have a clear owner. So like liveness probe, I know if I have an issue, I can go to Sergey. External snapshotter, if there's an issue, I know I talk to Jing or Xing. And there's very clear releases for each one. You can click on the releases and understand what went into each release. So I think my opinion on this has changed. I would prefer to keep the existing components as separate repos and introduce new repos for new components. I think for long-term manageability, that is going to work better than having a single Mondo repo.
Well, I guess in that case, we might have to talk about CI setup for testing all of these different components together, because that's currently not happening, or it's not clear how it happens. Each individual component publishes to the canary a canary image, and then somehow eventually someone does a release, but it's not clear, there's no public record whether any kind of integration testing has been done with a separate component.
Yeah. So right now, I think the mechanism that we use to do integration testing is a Kubernetes end-to-end test. The Kubernetes end-to-end test will deploy the drivers along with the sidecar containers, and then it'll run through a battery of tests. I think we need to improve that testing to make sure that it's thorough. But that's something that we can focus on.
I know the test, and I know how it works, and I have one of my tasks is to work with Michelle to enhance those tests. But the systematic issue is that we don't have an automatic CI where those tests actually run.
Right.
So it depends on someone doing the right thing, manually invoking those tests, and that's I don't know whether it happens for the 0.3.0 release, for example.
No, you're absolutely right. Today,
and I also don't know how it works for the maintenance releases. So for Canary, a while back, Louis said that he's pushing the Canary images and then manually tags certain releases of the images. But now I've seen that we have branches for 0.3, and if I haven't checked whether those images get pushed externally immediately for each build, but it looked like it. And then we are publishing updates that go potentially into production without running full end-to-end tests on those.
Yep. That I think you're absolutely right. If you have ideas on how to solve that without creating a single repo, I am very open to that.
Yeah, probably some repo with the tests and some CI system around it. But yeah, we need to think about that. My plan was to do it as part of this unified repo, because then it's trivial. You just have one Travis CI set up, and it tests all these components in that repo together.
Yeah, I agree. It might have made integration testing easier, but I think in terms of manageability of the code itself, it would have become a nightmare.
I'm not quite sure, because right now the effect is that I'm a bit less motivated to actually improve the source code, because it means in some cases making the exact same change 4 times, and I really have better things to do with my time.
Yeah, no, I understand. I think in those cases, what we should be doing is pulling the repeated code out into libraries that are living in their own repo. Ideally, there should not be any duplication of code. If we're duplicating code, we need to create libraries, library repos that have that code that's only updated.
Yeah, but then who does that? So we don't have an owner for those.
Yeah.
For those common components.
Yeah.
That was my idea with a common repository, because then it can have code that is shared, and there's at least an understanding that all our contributors to that unified repository are also maintainers of a shared code. But now we need to find
whether they live in a separate repo or not, it's going to be the same set of issues around ownership for a common shared library, right?
Yeah, but managing a library that is separate from the code using it is harder if it's in a separate repo. You basically need to be a lot more stricter about API compatibility.
Yep.
And in the interfaces, you can't make a change in just repo and break something in another repo.
Yep.
It becomes harder.
Yeah. Yep. And in fact, we already have this with the external provisioner. If you take a look at it, it depends on code in the external storage repo today. And yeah, I hear you. I understand that is painful. But a Mondo repo is going to come with its own share of challenges, and I think it'll be trading one set of issues for another set of issues, and it's also about velocity, right? We have a bunch of people that are already working on this project with the way that it's currently structured, and it becomes a real hassle to try to do the switch over in a graceful way.
Okay, well, I guess we also need to pull in Louis again, because I think he was managing the release process in the past,
yep.
Wasn't he? Or so we need him for continuing this. But to me, it's not fully settled, not unless we also clarify the release and integration TI testing thing.
Yeah, we can carry on the discussion. Let's say that for now it's an open issue, and we'll follow up on it later.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So we're well over time today. I'm not going to go through the status review today. Is there anything else anybody wanted to discuss? All right, cool. Thank you very much for your time, and apologies for going so late. Take care.